So I wanted to start this panel with a cryptocurrency joke, so here it is.
All right.
Litecoin. Okay, only a few people got that, but in honor of our previous guest, I wanted to make one Will Smith joke. So what does Will Smith say when he asks for Bitcoin, but somebody pays him in dollars?
I don't know.
Oh no, you did not shoot that green shit at me. Okay, so less of a laughing matter is Libra, Facebook's cryptocurrency that some people are worried is going to crater the world financial system.
Yep.
And the French finance minister said we cannot authorize development of Libra on European soil. But you are a Libra Association member, and Andreessen Horowitz is.
Yep.
So do you think that Libra is actually going to launch in the next year or two?
Yes, I do. So maybe stepping back, I could say, so we're very excited about cryptocurrency, and the way we view it is in the context of the history of computing. So if you go back to the history of computing, every 10 to 15 years is a new kind of major computing cycle. Mainframe computers, PCs, the internet, smartphones. We're in a period now where a whole bunch of interesting new computing platforms are getting built out. So for example, virtual reality, augmented reality, self-driving cars, a bunch of stuff in AI is very exciting, and then we think blockchains are also a new type of computing system that has a lot of interesting possibilities. When you create a blockchain, there's a lot of different possible applications. So people have probably heard of Bitcoin and Ethereum. Those blockchains make certain sort of technical trade-offs that make them good for some applications and not for other applications. What Libra's doing, which we're excited about, is they're designing a blockchain from scratch that's built to optimize for payments. And what does that mean? It means you need, for example, the stability of the currency. So a currency that is denominated in something like dollars. So when you pay a merchant, they actually get the dollars, and also something that has very high throughput. And we think they've done a really good job on the design of that. There are all sorts of, as you said, regulatory and other kinds of questions.
But do you think it's going to launch in the next year or two?
I do. Yeah, I do. I think, I don't know if there will have to be changes made, and it's going to be a dialogue with regulators and the partners and various other kind of stakeholders as to exactly what the design will be. But look, this is crypto is a global movement. China has said that blockchain is a national priority. It's happening all over. All of these kinds of projects and things are happening all over the world. The benefits could be immense. So for example, there are something on the order of 2 billion people who have smartphones today but don't have access to sort of the modern banking system, as an example. And many of those people use applications like WhatsApp. And so to provide a payment system that's, sorry, I think my sound's going out, to provide a payment system and to include those people in the financial system, while also providing a way for software developers and entrepreneurs to build applications on top that serve those people. It's a very powerful idea. It's very exciting to have a company the size of Facebook kind of supporting that. I hope that it's beginning of a process whereby more large tech companies get into this space. To me, I know you're a fan of VR like I am. Facebook's doing a lot of investment there. I would love to see more companies do investment there. Generally, at our firm, we are very much pro-innovation. We're pro-entrepreneurs. We want to see new technologies develop, and so the more people that are getting involved, the better. And it's awesome that Facebook is making such a big investment here. And yeah, so I do think it'll launch. And I do think it'll launch. I think there's a dialogue. It's complicated. The first is creating an association, which we're part of, which is happening now, and then that association will have a dialogue with regulators and with various other stakeholders, and make sure that what is created is something that benefits sort of all different constituencies. So, and then that may involve changes to the project.
What changes do you think the Libra Association would be flexible with? What could change that might help regulators come to terms with?
Well, I think one thing is, if you look at how it was received, a lot of people thought they were trying to create a new currency that was sort of a supranational currency. I think it's much better to think of it as a payment system.
So what would change to make people not think that?
So for example, denominating the currency in US dollars. I mean, I'm giving a hypothetical example, but that's the kind of thing. I don't think the intention was, my understanding is the intention was never to create sort of a new currency. If you see some of the various comments around it, it's much more focused on the payment rails, providing a payment system that, one, lowers fees, two, includes those 2 billion people that aren't currently included, and three, allows a platform where developers can build on top of it the way they build applications on the App Store or something like that, right? And so,
got it. Okay, so most recently, we've heard that Visa and Mastercard are considering how to pull back from the Libra Association because they're not really enjoying all of this legal scrutiny. What do you think about that? Are they kind of traitors or just lacking courage?
I don't know the specifics of what they're doing. I think I would say just generally, it's when you create these new things, there's a tension between existing companies that have have some kind of stake in the status quo and new technologies that, so I don't know, like imagine if you tried to create YouTube back in whenever YouTube was started in, I think, 2005 or 6, and tried at the time to work with, incumbent media companies. There may have been challenges. What I think tends to happen over time, if you look at things like YouTube now, like all the media companies have presences on those networks. Sometimes it takes, first, the way or Twitter or Facebook or any of these things, right? Sometimes it first requires kind of building something and getting people to use it, and then to really get the buy-in of the larger kind of incumbent players. So, but clearly, there's a big consortium. It's complicated. There's a lot of different interests. That's something that needs to be managed.
But given all of the scrutiny and all of the toxic brand that Facebook has developed, is Andreessen Horowitz still comfortable connecting its brand with Facebook's through the Libra Association?
Well, so there's a very important thing I want to say about blockchains, which is I wrote an article in Wired about this. If you're interested, it's the phrase I like to use is blockchains instead of an era of don't be evil, it's an era of can't be evil. And what I mean by that is the whole concept of a blockchain is it uses a game theoretic mechanism whereby it doesn't matter what the creator of the blockchain, their intentions are, or if they change their intention, it doesn't matter because it's baked into the code what the rules of the game are. And those rules cannot change, and they're open source, and they're openly auditable. So I would say, regardless of what someone might think of Facebook, it's sort of a separate question. As long as the blockchain is architected in the correct way, you don't need to know, you don't need to trust their intentions. That's kind of one of the exciting things about this whole movement, is I think over the last 20 years, I think a lot of people feel like they made a kind of a deal, like when you first joined Facebook or Twitter, whether you were a user or a media company, you made kind of a deal with that, an implicit deal, sometimes a real deal, like a terms of service and private, but an implicit deal that this is how the thing is going to operate. So if you go talk to a media company and how they feel about Facebook, they may feel like at first Facebook was very helpful, and then later on the rules changed, right? So one of the very important features of blockchains is that the rules are baked in from the start. They're transparent. They cannot change. Bitcoin was created by a pseudonymous person, Satoshi Nakamoto, that no one knows who that person is. It doesn't matter who that person is because the rules are baked into the network. That person could change, his or her mind. They could change their intentions. So I would just argue that one of the key features here is that that you don't need to, right? You don't need to sort of understand or even care about the motives of the people behind it.
So that works when there are rules written because the rules can't change. But we've seen a lot of problems stem from when the rules aren't written and what actually happens to those companies. And so most recently, the SEC only fined EOS maker Block1 $24 million for their not quite legal securities sale from its ICO that raised $4.1 billion. So that's a 0.5% fine. Do you think that that's fair, and is that going to embolden bad actors?
I don't know the details of that, and the way these things work, it could be one of many. I don't know what's it could be the beginning of a process. I don't know.
It's supposed to not be. There's no
we're not involved. So we're not involved with that project, and I don't know the details. But I will say that we think we have from the start. For example, this whole ICO craze in 2017, we never participated in that. We never invested in any companies that did any of these ICOs or sort of unaccredited investor sales. We have believed from the start that it's very important to work with regulators, and so the companies we're involved with take regulation very seriously in all the jurisdictions they're in, and we spend a lot of time on it. And my partner Katie Hahn, she's an expert in it, and we have a bunch of people at the firm who do it. I don't know enough about the details of that.
But do you think low fines for violations on the lots of money raised might just lead bad actors to be like, well, sure, if the rules aren't perfectly clear, I'll just break them because who knows, in worst case scenario, I get a tiny slap on the wrist.
Well, I think one thing that'd be nice is if the rules were clearer, because one of the frustrations we have right now is just that there aren't, basically we've sort of asked for guidance and looked for more kind of clarity on the rules, and so some of these, I think some of these issues are, look, I'm sure there are bad actors who are doing scams and things like this, but I do think some of these situations were just simply the lack of clarity in the rules, so I don't know whether EOS is one of those cases, but I do think like there have been a number of cases where people thought they were complying with regulations and just didn't understand what they were because none of it's been clarified, frankly.
Speaking of that, when there's so much cryptocurrency snake oil out there, and obviously there's plenty of projects where it's just obvious it's not going to work, there's a lot wrong with it, but when you see a legitimate project that otherwise seems like it has real potential, what are those final red flags that you're still seeing in this day and age that dissuade you from wanting to invest or get involved?
Well, so I kind of feel like crypto today is a little bit like the early internet in that there was this sort of gold rush, right? And if you go back to the 90s, there were a lot of bad companies created. There were a lot of kind of these IPOs and other things that probably should never have, companies that never should have IPO'd. But there was also Google, Amazon, PayPal, Yahoo, and that's our view of the current crypto world, is that there's a lot of things which we don't agree with how they're doing things, maybe they shouldn't exist, but there's also a lot of really, really high quality entrepreneurs, some great technologies. Out of this, we believe there will be iconic new companies that are built.
But if I'm a company out there trying to be like, I want to be a legitimate company, I don't want suddenly people to say like, oh, I'll just back away. What are some red flags that they could get rid of or fix in their companies?
Well, I think one of the core, what we believe is one of the core things that works in the startup world is a long-term focus where the employees, the founders, the investors, and the users are all aligned around a goal. And so, for example, there are all sorts of best practices that have emerged over the years with traditional startups about how to issue equity and how to treat your users and all sorts of other kinds of things, and take a long-term kind of win-win perspective on things. And that some of that has been lost in the crypto world. So we try to only work with entrepreneurs who have that attitude. We have that attitude. We have a venture fund that invests in, and it's a 10+ year venture fund, a very long-term perspective. We don't trade things. We buy, we invest, and we work as partners with the founders. What we do find is there's a lot of people just don't know. It's such a new area. They don't know what the best practices are. And so for that reason, for example, I wanted to mention that we're going to run a startup school in February and March for crypto-specific kind of startup school that will take what we've learned over the last 7 years as kind of best practices in the category that I think haven't fully propagated out and people don't fully understand, and try to kind of share them with people that come to this class, and then we'll also put everything on YouTube and everything else. This is just a purely educational thing. We're not taking equity. We're not charging. This is something we feel like we're now far enough into this crypto movement that there are best practices, but people don't fully understand them yet. It reminds me of I've been involved in startups for 15+ years, and I used to be an entrepreneur. And back in the 2000s, there was all sorts of like, how do you build a product? How do you find founders? How do you raise money? And then there were a whole bunch of people like Y Combinator and a bunch of bloggers and other people who did, I think, a really great public service, which is they took all these best practices and they promulgated them. And so we're trying to do our part here on the crypto world and sort of say, here's what we've learned. Here's the best way to sort of think about regulatory, about organizational building, about business model, about go-to-market, about technology, and here are the best practices we've learned, and sort of share them in an open source way with the world.
Is the hope that these companies would then raise money from Andreessen if you
potentially they don't have to. I mean, we hope sort of in a karma building way that they would like us and come talk to us if they did that. But we generally, the way we look at these things is if we we're kind of good community members and provide value to the community, that people will see that and hopefully want to work with us. But there's no requirement or anything like that.
So you spoke about trying to get there to be better, more legitimate rules, more clear rules, so that people know what to do and what not to do. But in May, you guys, Andreessen Horowitz, hosted officials from the Treasury Department, the
Yeah.
SEC, and other regulators, along with your portfolio companies. It was kind of a closed-door meeting that people were a little bit surprised about because it's not usual for all of those regulators to get together with a private company like that. So what was the message that you were trying to convey to them?
Yeah, we were trying to create a dialogue. So you have these two
A dialogue about what?
over like what's the best way to balance innovation and sort of regulatory concerns. And to I think what we saw was we engage with both constituencies, and we saw was a lot of misunderstandings. And so we held this event. By the way, we put everything on we videotaped the whole thing and put it on the internet. So it was pretty open. And it was a widely attended gathering, as a regulatory term, meaning it was a whole bunch of people, including people outside of our firm. But the idea was to just sort of start a dialogue so that people, look, if all you do is read the kind of the news media reports about crypto, you see scams and hacks, and it just looks like this big messy thing of all these scammers and things. That's not our at all.
It is a big messy thing.
There's a lot. There is messy stuff there, as there was in like the early internet. If I talked to Mark Andreessen about this a lot, and there was a lot of crazy stuff happening back in the 90s. He was writing. He saw it firsthand. So there is that certainly does exist, right? But we think that there is a lot of value in the technology, and we think I think it's important. I personally believe it should be an important national priority to make sure that we're the leader in it.
What was their biggest pushback about that, saying like, yeah, we get that you want innovation, but here's why the regulation and the safety is more important? What was
well, I think a lot, I think there's different dimensions. That's a great question. I think partly it's just sort of an understanding, like why are you doing this? So I gave a talk, it's on our website, A16Z, like I gave a talk just explaining why are we excited about this? Just sort of, we had a bunch of entrepreneurs explain like what they're doing, and just to see that there's real like societal value potentially in these technologies. And so that's one layer, sort of creating just a sort of shared understanding. And then I think there's a lot of just frankly technical questions. So there's, if you look at the way that the regulatory frameworks work around securities and commodities and the SEC and the CFTC, there's 70 years of knowledge kind of baked into these rules, and they've seen various eras and all sorts of stuff. And so there's just a lot of sort of also like technical questions, like what is the best practice? What should, because we believe the right business model for these companies is to, it's in many cases to have sort of coins and tokens associated with their projects, and to give those to employees, and to have, and so for example, our standard thing is like we'll invest, we'll buy tokens, they'll use that money to fund the company operations, the employees will be incentivized that way, kind of analogous to stock options. And then at some point over time, with the right vesting put in place and the right lockup rules and things like that, there might be opportunity for other people to participate in that. But like there need to be all sorts of safeguards. You can't have sort of what are effectively unregulated security offerings. And so so I think there's sort of both like a shared understanding dimension to that is what we're trying to do, and then also sort of start to begin to work out some of these more technical questions of like what is the right regulatory framework.
So just finally, one of your big investment theses is following nerd energy, or the places where engineers are really geeking out and oftentimes building something that suddenly becomes mainstream important. What areas are you seeing losing nerd energy, and which areas are gaining that nerd energy?
Yeah, so I by the way, I say that, I've written blog posts about this. I think I use the word nerd, by the way, very affectionately.
Oh, me too.
So okay, so this is like a positive thing. What I mean by that is sort of, there's, you look at the history of Silicon Valley.
Which ones are the ones, we don't have too much time, so I just want to see like, which ones are gaining nerd energy?
I mean, I think to me, the by far the biggest kind of nerd energy thing is crypto. So that's why I'm sort of all in on this. And there's just a ton of really smart people, and it's misunderstood, and it skews like all the really smart technical people are in it, like are really in it, and they're deeply passionate, and they, like it's off the charts. I think like VR, I know it's in the trough of disillusionment right now. I think the Oculus Quest is a breakout product. I love the Oculus Quest subreddit is one of my favorite things to read every day. So I don't know. I think that's like a really interesting area. I think
any areas we might not think of? I think like crypto and VR have been around for a minute, but.
Yeah, no, I think some of these things, some of them have like AI used to be one, right, or machine learning specifically, but that has obviously transitioned into the mainstream. I'm still very into hardware. I know hardware is out of fashion in the startup venture world right now, I think, or I think, I don't know, like I personally spend my weekends, with Arduinos and 3D printers, and I think I love all that world of sort of open source hardware, and I think it's very exciting. And I think that's sort of not, as in right now, I guess.
Fine. So just to recap some of the interesting points, Chris does think that Libra is going to launch in the next few years, but one option might be changing its denomination from Libra to US dollars to make regulators a little bit more comfortable with it. And obviously there's going to be big companies that have a stake in the status quo that might be interested in pulling back because they don't need it to succeed. But after this whole gold rush, if we can focus more on the long term and get everyone aligned, from the investors to the employees to the users, with the right incentives, crypto might be able to last a little bit longer. But we're going to need stronger rules and to answer all those technical questions of regulators. But if you're looking for the next big area, augmented reality, virtual reality are still in, but there's plenty to build in cryptocurrency. So hope you guys find whatever the rest of the future of green is.
Can I say one last thing, which is if you're interested in the crypto startup school, if you go to a60z.com, we have a place where you can put in your email address, and we'll send more information when we have it.
Great.
So
thank you guys all for watching.
Thanks.